Good morning to everyone. On behalf of the Microservice as a Service, bridging the gap between NLP research and industry project, I'm so pleased to welcome you to this online workshop we have entitled ELG, a Bridge for NLP Development. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Joaquin Lago. I work at Gradian, that is one of the partners of the microservice project. And I've been working with the natural language processing technologies for a couple of years right now. But today I'm just going to be the presenter of this event. And I will try to do my best to give the floor to the correct speaker in the correct moment and to take care of the question you as our audience may have during the event. So please, I feel free to use the chat of the Zoom platform, or even better, the question and answer box to let us know your doubts, comments, questions. And we have already booked 10 minutes slot, more or less, for answering all of those questions at the end of the event. So don't be shy, please. We will try to answer all of your questions if we can't. With this workshop, we have two main objectives in mind. First of all, is let you know about the European language grid. We expect that when you leave this workshop, you will have a better idea about what LG is, how to benefit from the LG, and how to interact with the European language grid. And the second objective is to do a bit of dissemination of our project, of our microservices as a service project. And to do so, we have split our presentation, our workshop in three parts, led by three different speakers. First of all, Mr. Sebastian Andersson will tell us about the microservices project itself. Sebastian works in a Finnish company called Learnsoft, and he is an expert in speech and language processing, natural language processing technologies. And he has been the leader of the microservice project for around a year. So he is the person we need to talk to let us know everything we need to know about the microservices project. Thank you, Sebastian, for joining us today. Then we are glad to have here with us Mr. Ian Roberts from the Department of Computer Science of the University of Sheffield as our expert in ELG. Mr. Roberts has participated in the development of the language the ELG platform, and he is co-author of many papers about the European language grid. Thank you, Ian, for joining us today again. Then my colleague, Pedro Alonso, will show us how to interact with the LG platform. Pedro, in the scope of the microservices project, has been working with the LG platform for around a year. So he can tell us some tips, some clues about how to use the platform and how to get the most benefit of it. Thank you, Pedro, for joining us. Then we expect to do a little break just to let you think and recap about what we're going to tell you today. And after the break, we will have that little time slot for question and answer resolving. And I will pass you through the chat a link to a very, very short feedback survey that we will use to send you back certificates of assistance of this event. So thank you all for being here. And please, Sebastian, I give you the floor to let us know about the microservices project.
Thank you. Let's see if I can share here. That was an annoying little button. there. All right, let's move you here. All right, so I'll present the microservices at your service project then. So this project consists of a consortium with Gradient from Spain and Linksoft from Finland and Reykjavik University from Iceland and University of Tartu from Estonia. And the whole project is co-financed by the Connecting Europe facility of the European Union. So we looked at it a little bit before already. So I'll start with introducing the microservices project. Then Ian Roberts will introduce the ELG platform. And then Pablo will take a deep dive into how to do things with ELG. And then we'll take a short break, like 5-10 minutes, depending on how our schedule holds. And finally, then we'll have a Q&A where we can hopefully answer some of your questions. So our project is concerned with the European speech and language technology. And I'm sure you're familiar with it, that there are many variants of these technologies like speech recognition, machine translation, and so on and so forth. And we have large international organizations that provide these type of services, often in a software as a service manner for many languages. Sometimes they even offer a platform as a service where you can add your own tools. And a little bit of parenthesis, you can also rent your infrastructure there if you have your own platform. And then it's called infrastructure as a service. So then all is good, right? If you want Estonian MT, Finnish ASR, Icelandic TTS, and so on. Our impression is that there's gaps in the services provided by the large players. Especially for languages with not so many speakers. I think it's fair to say that we haven't failed to be the first, second, or third priority by the large corporations very often. But we have a strong speech and language technology research community, in particular in the areas that we have looked into. And there is a strong tradition of sharing the tools as open source code. And then we also have the European Language Grid, who aims to establish themselves as the primary platform for language technology in Europe in competition with these organizations from Asia and America. And they aim to do this for both commercial and non-commercial language technologies. And Ian will tell you more details about that. So back to the open source tools, then there are benefits and challenges here. So the benefits are that they are a good way to get hold of the latest and greatest in research in language and speech technology, for example. And there is also many established and trusted tools in this flora and fauna of tools. And of course, they're free to use and they're free to adapt. And as an example, both Linksoft's speech recognition and machine translation are based on open source toolkits. The challenges, it can be difficult to find unless you're involved in that particular line of research and know the research groups. Sometimes when you find them, they can be quite poorly documented. Especially the documentation is lagging behind the latest updates, so you don't get the support you need to install it. And when you come across a tool laying around, it's not always easy to see, is it worth the trouble at the end? They advertise it with some academic references, but does it really work? And then finally, if you manage to install it, then it's not so easy to share with the colleagues that needs to use it or reinstall it. So this is where our project comes in, that we have gotten funding and a plan from digging into these research groups and the GitHubs and find the tools and test the tools that we find interesting. And then we'll package them. And I'm dropping some terminology here in the cloud already, that they are Dockerized solutions plus APIs. So we package their tools and then Dockerize and put an API on them, and then they are easily shared with others. And we are sharing them via ELG. And hopefully then we have ourselves a use for these tools, but the idea is that also others will find them useful for the benefit of the researchers and for the benefit of the integrators. So taking a little bit of a step back then, what is it that we package? I mentioned already the software as a service paradigm, where you basically access tools via the internet, often via some API, in our case a REST API. So we have here in the right-hand box, my application, where I have a speech recognition tool, for example. Then I add a REST API to it, put it on a web server, then I expose it to the internet, and then other integrators can call my speech recognition, send audio over the internet, and receive back a transcription. And these SaaS services you can package with Docker. And what you end up with when you package it with Docker is a virtual machine of that service. And that virtual machine you can share easily. You can share via an email or a download page. A download page is more common. And those packages are called images. The benefit of that is that it makes it very easy to install tools with different dependencies on the same host machine. For example, I share one GPU machine with some colleagues of mine, and we all have our different set of tools on Dockers, which makes it very easy for us to share the same GPU, but with completely different tools. And if you look at the research community, then, for example, if you participate in a machine translation challenge, then you can package your tool onto a Docker, and then the next year, then someone else can easily try your tool with a different set of data and compare how does their new version compare to your old version and so on. And it also makes it easy to combine these different images into a microservice architecture. So in a microservice architecture, you basically package your NLP components, your speech and language technology, into these Docker containers. And then you have a platform that sort of orchestrates these containers. Kubernetes is a common option. And this type of architecture makes it very easy to integrate open source components, third-party components. You can easily add new languages and functionality, provided that you find a tool that does what you like. And you can also easily replace outdated components when you find a better one. And then on top of that Kubernetes, you have a REST or an API layer that then clients, customers can integrate your tools with. And this is a simplified picture of how ELG works, and it's a simplified picture of how Linksoft's platform works. And to my understanding, it's a fair representation of also how the big organizations' clouds work. So if you look at the progress so far, what we have found, we have, for example, found Heliots. It's a language identification tool that we have found very useful in our own pre-processing pipeline of text, like dividing up, is this Swedish, is this Finnish? Provided by University of Helsinki. And we have Dockerized it, we have put it on the Docker Hub, and it remains to put it on ELG, but that's work in progress. And we have some other examples down here, like BERT models from Sweden and Norway's national libraries, for example. If I summarize, then this is a 3-year project, and we are pretty exactly halfway. So we expect to finish next year this time. And the objective is to make at least 40 tools available as these easily integratable microservices for a total of 11 languages. And we have a project web page where we continuously update this list of tools. And we also have links and recordings to previous workshops. For example, one on how to make these Docker images and add an API yourself. And I would say it's surprisingly easy. And I believe with that, I'll hand over to Ian or Joaquin.
Thank you, Sebastian. Now we will let Mr. Ian Robbins to tell us about the LFG. Please, Mr. Ian.
So yes, as Sebastian and Joaquin said, my name's Ian Roberts, and I'm one of the developers behind the European Language Grid platform and the EU project. I work at the University of Sheffield, but I've obviously been working very closely with colleagues from the other partner organisations in the ELG project since the beginning of 2019. So a little bit about the background first. So, I mean, it goes without saying that multilingualism is at the heart of the whole European idea and the ideals of the European Union. There are 24 official EU languages that all have the same legal status within the EU, as well as dozens of regional minority languages, things like the Northern Sami and the other languages that Sebastian was mentioning. And then languages of immigrant and trade partner countries. So that includes things like obviously the European Economic Area, so Norway and Iceland and so on, but also languages of important trade partners outside of Europe as well. So if we want the kind of this idea of a digital single market within Europe, then it needs to be multilingual. And there are many economic, social, and technical challenges that are that are presenting themselves when in trying to reach this this point. Obviously, one of the big challenges is that within Europe, the language technology landscape is very much fragmented. So Sebastian obviously referred to the big players, the likes of the Googles and the Microsoft and Amazon, but particularly for the smaller languages, the EU and European language technology marketplace generally is generally made up of many small companies, small medium enterprises, which deal with a small, they specialize in a very small number of languages or a small particular domain within the language technology, whether that's speech, whether it's text, or whether it's even more fine-grained like that. So there'll be individual companies that specialize in doing processing medical data in Hungarian, and part of the challenge is to bring all of these small players together in one place, so that the services that they offer can be more easily findable by potential customers. So this is just a sort of, I don't expect you to be able to read everything that's written on this, but this is a kind of a timeline that sets the European language grid in its historical context. And it all really dates back to the foundation of the MetaNet Network of Excellence in around 2010. And there's been a whole series of other initiatives and projects since then, which eventually led to the foundation of the European language grid in 2019. So there's a couple that I'm going to particularly draw your attention to here. So in the early days of MetaNet, in around 2012, they put together a set of what we call white papers detailing the sort of the state of support for language technology in a number of European languages in the digital age. Some official EU languages, some of the minority languages we were talking about before, and some of the kind of partner languages like Icelandic. And unsurprisingly, at the time, we're talking 2012 here. Again, you can't necessarily read this this slide in detail, but essentially the take-home message is that the only language that has quite good support across the board is English, or was English. There are some other languages, French, Spanish, German, Italian, those particularly that had reasonable support across the different types of areas of language technology. But the majority of languages support was somewhere between fragmentary and non-existent. And this is the graph. Obviously, you can imagine that there's English has had good support. There's those few languages that had reasonable support, and then a long tail of languages for which the support was very, very much fragmentary. And I mean, that was 2012. We're 10 years later now, but the overall picture is, the baseline has moved up, but the overall picture is still the same. So English is kind of approaching excellent, maybe. And then some languages like French, Spanish, Dutch, German are getting towards good support, but it's still the case that there's a massive inequality between support for the major languages and support for smaller languages. The other thing worth mentioning is that in 2017, the European Parliament commissioned a study into language equality in the digital age, and that ultimately ended up in a European Parliament resolution that was passed by a landslide in 2018 that made a number of recommendations, like 45 different recommendations on various related topics. But several of those recommendations pointed towards the need to establish a Europe-wide LT platform for sharing of services and resources as a kind of one-stop shop for language technology in Europe. And this led to the foundation of the European Language Grid. There was also a study done by LICEF, the Connecting Europe facility, that was essentially predicting that the language technology market in Europe would reach something like €1 billion in 2020. And another study that said that maybe $29.5 to $30 billion market worldwide by 2025, which were obviously incredible numbers at the time, but they're already obsolete thanks to the massive rise in popularity of artificial intelligence and deep learning. These numbers are way out of date now. But basically, the take-home message is that there's a big market, but it's very fragmentary, and there are hundreds of small enterprises addressing very specific niches. So what we need is a single platform as a kind of a hub where all the different users and consumers of producers and consumers of language technology will know that if you want to make something available, put it there. If you want something to use for a particular task, look there. And that was hence the foundation of the European Language Grid. So the European Language Grid, as a Horizon project, began at the beginning of 2019 and has this is a selection of the kind of project objectives. And it's pretty much what I said. So we're establishing a language technology platform and marketplace in Europe to tackle this fragmentation. We wanted to be a platform for both commercial and non-commercial language technologies. So both the kind of the research type services that Sebastian's been talking about, but also commercial providers such as Linksoft's own commercial offerings, and as a kind of a way to connect customers and providers, and also as a way to store not just services but data sets, to deploy services and connect them and make the resources and services available for use by others to enable businesses to grow and benefit from being able to scale up like that. So the ELG was originally conceived as a 3-year project, so it would have been start of 2019 to the end of 2021. It's been extended by 6 months because of the effects of the pandemic. So we're now officially in, I think, month 39 of 42. So we've just within the last month or so completed what we're referring to as the final release. I mean, it's not final. Eventually, we had sort of 3 milestone releases through the life of the project, but we've been continuously adding features on an incremental basis as we go along. So we had the official kind of quotes final release last month, but we're still adding more to that now, and we've been sort of moving into starting to get more contributions from outside the project. So this is your kind of big picture. So you've got the European Language Grid as the platform in the middle, and then you'll find organisations, both sort of public organisations and private businesses, who have their developed language technologies, either data resources or tools and services, are able to make their tools available through in the ELG platform, and have them properly indexed and linked so that they can be easily found. So when potential customers or potential users, again, which can be public or private organisations, come along and want to find tools that they can use, then they can use the European Language Grid catalogue to discover the services that may be of use to them, to test them live in the catalogue interface, and then when they find a service that works for them, then if they're on their data, then they can actually integrate it using the APIs in their own tools, and make use of it in products or whatever else. And we provide things like a Python SDK, which Pedro will say more about later, which allows for easy integration of ELG services into other software. So aside from that, aside from explicit contributions by individual providers, the ELG also harvests metadata records from other relevant repositories on a regular basis. So places like Zenodo, ELRC, Hugging Face, some of these you may have heard of yourselves. Hugging Face is the kind of model library for machine learning models. So the idea is that the ELG will regularly pull metadata, not the actual data, but the metadata from these other repositories and create links there, so that, again, you can come to the ELG as your starting point, but if the resource you want is hosted in another repository, then we can redirect you to there. So the idea then is that ELG becomes this kind of metadata catalog that will cover everything. So we become this joint technology platform for the whole European LT community, and a joint tool, data and resource sharing platform, and a marketplace as well. So what I haven't mentioned yet is that as well as being able to provide these kind of free of charge services, the vision is for ELG to be able to support commercial providers who make their services available for payment and subscription. This isn't quite in place yet because of the legal structure reasons, but this is what we're actively working on at the moment and hope to go live within the next couple of months. And so the ELG becomes the kind of yellow pages, if you like, of the European LT community, a one-stop shop where people can, both users and producers of language technology can meet. So the current state of play for the ELG, these numbers are actually slightly out of date already because I put these slides together. Well, the slides I'm using were originally based on a set from about January or February. I made some updates earlier this week, and since then I've integrated another tranche of extra services. So we're up to something like 770, I think, functional services directly integrated within ELG at the moment. The catalogue has something like 12,000 total metadata records, which are made up of 1,700 or so organisations. Maybe half the resources in the catalogue at the moment are corporate data sets of one kind or another. But as I say, there are 700 something records which represent functional services that are directly integrated within the ELG, and that's the kind of thing which this microservices project is targeting. So as I mentioned, this is supposed to be a long-term sustainable initiative. So while the Horizon project is nearing its end, the idea is that the ELG platform will continue to run beyond the end of the project under the ownership of a new not-for-profit company, new legal entity. And that it's that legal entity that we're kind of in the process of establishing at the moment. And once that is established, then we will be able to start offering billing and payment support for commercial services. It's a bit difficult to do that when it's actually still a Horizon project, because it's kind of which partner, and the project doesn't really have a legal existence of its own. So this is why it takes a little longer to get these things sorted out. But this is definitely on our radar for the moment. We've kind of worked out a number of ways, approaches of covering the ongoing costs on a long-term basis. So watch this space really is the message there. The other thing I want to mention is that part of the ELG project, the Horizon project, was what they call financial support for third parties. So this was essentially 2 open calls for proposals for what we referred to as pilot projects, which were either it was calls to offers of funding to external organisations to either integrate their services into ELG and broaden the ELG portfolio, or to demonstrate how they would use the services provided by the ELG to enhance their own products, as a way to kind of demonstrate the usefulness of ELG to consumers. And one of the organisations that was funded in the first open call for this was Linksoft, who integrated a number of their tools for speech and language into the ELG as microservices. And I think that was kind of the germ of the idea for the microservices at your service project. So because I worked quite closely with Linksoft back in 2020 to try and get some of their microservices integrated in the ELG. So I'll show you a few quick graphs just to finish off. So this is the kind of number of resources over time, just showing you how kind of things have grown through the lifetime of the ELG project. This particular graph runs from February 2020 through to November 21. And you can see this kind of gradual increase over time. I mean, this one graph doesn't really give a lot of information, in the sense that this is probably a more useful one, which is broken down by resource types. So you can see obviously that a big chunk of these, the red line at the top, is the corpora, the data sets. The orange line, yellow line in the middle is the records for organizations. And that's something else which we're going to mention, I think, in a little bit. The idea is that the records ELG catalog don't just represent the services and the data sets, they also represent the organizations and projects that are the providers of these data sets. So it's all kind of linked together in that way. The sort of pink line at the bottom, say at the bottom, just because the integrated services, obviously the numbers are somewhat swamped by the corpora that we've harvested from other metadata repositories. But you can see that, you know, we've grown up to, it was around 500 integrated services at the point where this graph was produced. Like I say, since then, we've added another 200, 250 plus services coming from a variety of different places. Most notably, there's another EU-funded project called NTEU, Neural Translation for the European Union, who are producing something like 500 plus machine translation models for all the possible combinations of the 24 EU official languages. And I think we've integrated about a third of their models so far. We've got the other 2/3 in the pipeline. And we also started very recently, obviously in light of recent events, we are working now on setting up machine translation systems for Ukrainian into and out of a number of EU languages as part of a platform to assist refugees from the recent conflict. And that's an ongoing effort, but we've certainly integrated probably a good 40 or 50 so different services involving the Ukrainian language over the last couple of weeks. And then obviously beginning to get a decent number coming in from microservices at your service as well. So this is you know, just to give you a flavour of you know, how things are moving on, and that these numbers are, you know, you can't really just show this on a static graph. It's all, everything's growing all the time. This is a quick snapshot of the number of registered users. As you can see, we're up to something like 400 or so consumers and 200, 250 or so provider users registered as of January this year. So I'll give you a quick look at the ELG platform itself. So we've got on the data consumer side, so consumers can search and browse the ELG catalog for all different types of language processing services, data related projects and organizations. So there's a combination of free text search and a faceted search system, which allows you to filter by language, by service function, by license, conditions of use, and so on for various resources. View the detailed information and sort of view the statistics about what's involved. If you're interested in services, then you can actually try out and test language processing services live in the ELG on the ELG site, and you can call the services from the command line or the Python-based API. This is all stuff that Pedro will go into more detail on later on. As a provider, you can contribute. You can contribute by providing formal descriptions which of your resources, your language technologies, and also the organizations and projects, and these all get linked together so that you can kind of follow the links from one to the next and I'm just going to give you a quick demonstration of that before I hand over to Pedro. So this is what you see when you go to the Open Language Grid catalog. Like I say, there's a free text search box across the top, but the main interesting part is this faceted search down the left-hand side, and you can see all the different facets that you can make use of. So in particular, so say for example, if I'm interested in particular types of services, so I'm only interested here in ELG compatible services, which means the ones that have been fully integrated that I can call from the ELG interface. And the function that I'm looking for is, say, spell checking. And you can see I'm already down to something like 8 services here, which are various ones produced by Linksoft. If I wanted to narrow it further, I could narrow down by language, and you can see these facets change as you do a search. The numbers filter down to just the ones that apply to the what you found so far. So let's have a look at, say, to look at the English proofing tools. Now you'll see with looking at these that obviously there's general metadata information about the about the service itself. This is the input. This is what it outputs, and so there are sort of keywords and descriptive metadata. Download and run. Now for open source services, we actually we provide a link to allow you to download the Docker image and run it locally on your own machine. This particular service is a commercial provider, Linksoft, so it's not one that you can actually download and run yourself. And then the other 2 tabs are to do with how you would use the service. So of course I'm not logged in. So yes, this is the thing, you have to be signed in to ELG in order to test these services out. So I've now logged in, and I can just try out the service here. This is an example of misspelled text. Submit it for testing, and excuse me, and we will get back a response saying, okay, so this is a word which has not been recognised, and it's suggesting that you might want to replace it with example. So this is just to demonstrate so that we have these kind of what we call these tryout user interfaces for all different types of services. We have ones that do text annotation like this. There are machine translation services. We have an example for audio services as well, so speech recognition, where you can either just speak into your microphone and record live, or you can upload a file that's of speech that you already have, and it will do the speech recognition and show you the text. Code samples is an example here of how you can actually make use of this service from your own code, either with a very simple curl where you just have to paste in the actual access token, or the Python example here is the Python SDK, which handles all the authentication details for you. And these are, as I say, things which Pedro will talk about later on. The other interesting part, though, is if I go back to this overview tab, as I was saying, that that the catalog includes not just the services and the data sets themselves, but also information about the providers and the organizations and the projects. So here, for example, I can say resource provider Linksoft. Now this Linksoft is their metadata record representing Linksoft as an organization. And again, it's much the same. So for organizations, you have keywords, these are the language technology areas that the company is active in. And that's a search facet as well. So you can search for companies that do these particular areas of language technology in the particular language that I'm interested in. And then there's links here for the related technologies and projects. So here, for example, Linksoft have obviously produced that they've integrated a number of these different services: machine translation, speech recognition, proofing tools, text analysis, and they're also part of these projects. So going back to the proofing tools, you'll see this is funded by LS Disco. This is the record about the ELG pilot project that we funded Linksoft to carry out. And again, you can see that's what that project is what provided all these services. So you can bounce back and forth between the two, between the resource. You can find a project that funded it, then you can find other resources that were funded by the same project, and so on. So this was what I was saying about the organization records. So I think that's probably enough talking from me now, and I will hand back to there we go. I will hand back to either to Joaquin or straight over to Pedro, whatever's easiest.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you for your presentation. I think now all of we have a better idea about what LFG is and how to interact with it. So now it's turn to my colleague Pedro Alonso. Now we are going to change into the how to section of this workshop. He is going to share with us how to interact with the LFG platform. Please, Pedro.
Hello, good morning. My name is Pedro Alonso from Gradient. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so I am going to talk about how to use it, how to use the...
Pedro, please change to full screen mode, please.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I'm going to talk to you about how to contribute to the ELG platform and how to benefit and use the tools and resources that there are available in the ELG platform. So first of all, we want to show you how can we upload tools or resources to the platform. So for this, we must be registered as providers. So for this, we must sign up as a user in the ELG platform, and we want to become a provider. So we must make this request, and the ELG must accept us. So we have to wait for becoming a provider to this request being approved. So
provider approval usually should happen within 24 hours. Usually, it's not a long wait. It's just a spam filter, really, more than anything.
Yes, it's usually quick, this approval. So once we are providers, we have to add the itself. So we go to My Grid section and to the organization subsection. And here we have to fill some fields and data about our organization, like the name, description, our website, put some contact details, keywords to make it easy to find the organization in the browser, and the language technology areas that the organizations work about. Also, if there is a parent organization, we should put it here. So once we have the organization created in the platform, we want to upload there the tools. So what kind of tools can be uploaded here? Okay, first of all, these are the tools that are the types of tools that are supported by the platform. So there are information extraction, text classification, machine translation, automatic speech recognition, text-to-speech generation, and image analysis. It is important to say that these are not strict types. What I mean by this, like for example, machine translation supports any type of text-to-text tools. So for example, summarization tools whose input is a text and the output is also a text with the summary of the input, it could fit here as a machine translation type tool. And the same with other kind of tools that may fit in any other categories by the types of its input or output. And then we also have corpus. We can upload the corpus we may want to upload to the platform. They must be in a zip file, and in the metadata, it's important that we put that if they contain personal or sensitive information, and in that case, if this information is anonymized or not. Okay, now we go into details about how to upload the tool and what is the process that we must follow to upload the tool. So first of all, we have to select, of course, the tool we want to contribute and implement an API to access and to use this tool. This is an standardized API that is specified by the ELG, so that all the tools are accessed in the same way with this API. So it makes it easy to standardize the use of all the tools in the platform. This API must go inside a Docker container. So we must Dockerize the tool and the API and make the image available publicly. Then we have to upload it and write some metadata in the platform. Also in the middle, we will talk about how to test and check that our implementation of the API and of the Dockerization is correct according to the specifications of the ELG. So we are going to go deeper into each of these steps by using an example of a tool that we have working with during this microservices project. So this is a question and answering tool, a model for Spanish. So I'm going to show you here the GitHub. So here there is all the information to install and to use it. But the important part is here. This is the script that implements the tool, which the important part is evaluate method that gets the question and the context and responds with the result, with the answer of the question the users propose. So, okay, this is the tool we are going to show how we developed the API. So now talking about the API, here is the link for the specifications of the API. And it's an API that accepts some types of requests that are text requests, structured text, audio, and images. And it has some type of responses defined that are the failure response and annotation, classification, texts, and audio response. It's important for developers to know that the ELG provides some libraries, helper libraries for Java and Python that make it very easy to develop the API because they help to parse the request and also to build the responses that with the specifications of the API without making the developers to be really very careful with the fields of the responses or the requests. So we are going to show some examples of the structure of the requests. This is a text request that, as you can see, it has some fields like the params, the content, the MIME type, and it can have features or annotations, but most of these are optional fields. In practice, the majority of the tools are going to have this simple format that is only the type and the content with the text. Also, the audio and image requests have a extra format field to indicate the format of the audio or the image you are going to use. And in this case, it's even more recommended to use the ELD helpers to handle these formats that are not have a more complex structure than the text and the text data. And now we are going to talk about the responses of the API. So the successful response, it has the type. The type is always here. It may have some warnings or other properties in each case for the tool. And the failure responses, it must show an array of status messages that have this structure, a code that it may be, for example, there is no translation for this text, or that it may happen some problem during the execution. And there is a standard set of failure messages standardized by the ELD, and that they are also translated to many languages. So here, for example, the request size is too large, invalid message, invalid response, image format not supported. Okay. This is an example of the response of the typed texts that you can see it has an array of texts that we will explain now a bit more deeper, because the text response may be in the simplest case just a text with the answer of the tool, but imagine in a tool that answers with some translations for a text, it may be an array of texts like this. And in other case, it may be a two-level list, for example, where the first level is like the sentence, but in the second level, there is an array of the words in the sentence, for example. This is an example of the audio response, where the most important here, the most important difference with the text response is that say that the ELD offers as microservice to store image or audio. So it's important to know it as developers to use it and benefit from this. So we can put in the content location field the URL of where it is allocated to find it. So now, from these general structures, we are going to the case of this question answering tool that we are using as an example. So we can make to the tool this request of type structured text, where we can say that the capital of Spain is Madrid, and we ask which is the capital of Spain. This is a translation, of course, because I think most of you will understand it better in English, but the original case is in Spanish. So we expect here to get that the answer is Madrid, and the answer obviously is Madrid, and it also says that Madrid is in the position 24 to 30, counting characters. So it is true. If you count here is the 24. I'm not going to count it now, but And now we are going to see how we implemented this in the code. So this is the script where the API is served. And we can see that we import the tool, the Spanish question answering tool that we've seen before. So in this endpoint, we receive the requests, we get the context and the question, and we call the evaluate method of the tool to get the result. And what we have to do with this result? We have to generate the structure that we have just seen here with the start, the end, and the answer, and the score it gets for the answer. So as you can see, this is the same structure we have just seen here. So now, third step, what happens when we already have the API implemented? We have to Dockerize it. And for this, we have three options for the later deployment in the ELD platform. So in the majority of the cases, that is also the case of this example that we are making, there is a standalone container that is just a Dockerization of the tool in a container. And we upload it to the platform and it's available there. But in many cases, it may happen that we want to contribute a tool that already has an API, but it's not the ELD API. So we need to also implement this ELD API. What we can do is, like in this middle example, make an adapter that is the implementation of the ELD API, that what it makes with the requests is forward them, like make another request to the API of this tool we are using. But they are all in the same container, so they can refer each other as localhost. Sorry. And then the last case is the same when there is a tool with an API, but it is already deployed in cloud, in the internet. And what we have to do is, as we have to have the API implementation in the ELD platform, when you call this API, they forward and make a call to this external API and gets the response. But for the user, in the three cases, is the same. The user will call the tools through the ELD platform. So in fact, the users don't care, and they will they are not going to be aware of how this is internally working. So I'm going to show you first of all how we implemented this Dockerization, but it's really simple. As you can see here, we import the files to the container, and we just call the serve script, that is the one that implements the API, and we expose it in this port. So once we have the tool Dockerized, we want to, before uploading to the platform, we want to make some comprobations to check that it doesn't have any problem with the ELD platform and with the ELD API. So we will talk about this longer in a further section. So first of talking about this, I'm going to finish with the process of uploading a tool. That the next step is make the image public. So in this case, we use a Docker Hub but you can use any other platform like GitLab, for example. So here is our image available. You can make a Docker pull for getting it. And here is a README with some information about it. And then finally, we have our tool prepared to be uploaded. What do we have to do? We have to go to the ELG website and go again, my grid section and to service or tool. And here is where we will have to cover a lot of fields with information about the tool. Like in this first tab of identity, we have to put the name, the description of the tool, the version also, it's a required field, and then like who is the tool creator, the tool provider, etc. Then in the categories tab, we have which type of application is, and the keywords, for example, to again make it easier to find it in the browser. And then we have many other tabs like the contact, where you must put information and details for support of who you can contact if there is any necessity. And then in the tools and service tab is more technical, for more technical information, like the parameters of the requests and the inputs and the outputs format. Also, you have to put if it's language dependent or which language does this tool understand. And you may provide some sample input data. So this helps both the validators during the process of checking that everything is okay, and also as Ian showed us before, it helps the users to know how to use this tool from the catalog and to see which is the purpose of the tool. Also, we have the distribution tab, where we can put information like the privacy of the image, where is the location of the Docker, of the Docker image, the endpoint, so that the ELG platform can access the image and call the API, the license of the tool, and some special hardware requirements the tool may have, like if it needs a lot of memory or if it needs a GPU. So you should put it here to see if these requirements can be available or not, depending on the case.
I will just jump in and say that at present, we aren't able to provide GPU capacity on the live ELG cloud. So anything that you're sort of publishing for use on there would need to be CPU rather than GPU at the moment. We're looking into the options for how that might be possible, but it's very difficult to do it in a way that's cost effective, given the scale that we're at the moment. But certainly, we're happy to host records that point to GPU software that people can download and use themselves, but we can't promise to be able to host it in our cluster on a GPU.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. Okay, and now we can say that there is another option for writing the metadata instead of doing this manual process that we have just seen from the website interface. We can upload the metadata in an XML file. For this, maybe we can recommend that the first time you want to upload a tool, you do this manual process. And then in the next cases, you can download as XML file the metadata you put for this first tool and use this file as a template for others. So you, in this template, you change all the fields that you require to change, and then you import it into the ELD. So maybe it's easier and make it a bit fast, the process. So finally, once we have filled all this metadata, some validators of the ELD must accept the publication. So there is a technical validator that will check this API compliance, for example, and that everything works okay in the interaction with the platform. And also a legal validator that will check the license conditions to see that there are not any legal issues. And when this approval is done, the service is published and can be available in the ELD platform. Okay, now we're going to jump a bit back in this testing I said, because this is the reason we require this checking. During developing time, probably this will be the common case where the user makes a request to the tool and it answers. This tool can be executed as Python or Java or whatever program, or it can be already Dockerized, but it's a direct request. In the ELD platform, there will be an intermediate service execution server that is the one that will receive all the requests and forward each request to the container of the tool that the user want to use. And the same with the response. It acts as a proxy. So we want to have this service execution server in our local deployment for test that everything goes okay. And if you, for example, make a request that the server doesn't understand, it will tell you, so you can change all the things that don't work as expected before uploading it to the platform. So for this, there is a GitLab where there are this server is this one, where there is a simple service to test, but also there is a service with temporary storage and with an interface, and another one with both things. We are going to show how to use the simple service. It's a Docker Compose that deploys both the REST server, so this intermediate server that is the same as the one the ELD platform, in a container, and in another container it will deploy our tool container that we have to indicate here, which is our image in this environment variable file. We can put the location of the image and information about the port and the endpoint. So with this deployment, we are going to have this infrastructure deployed. Okay, this is what we have already seen in the GitLab interface. The same with this. And I'm going to talk about another option to make this deployment, that is using the ELD SDK that we will talk about in the last section about this SDK. And it makes easier the deployment. You just have to use one instruction indicating the path of the image and the execution location. But anyway, in both cases, you obtain the same deployed infrastructure, and you can use it, for example, to make a request and check that everything is okay. So in the case that there is not any problem, we make here, this is the same request we used in the example before, and we receive the same answer without any other complaint. But what happens when there are problems? There are some potential errors that we may discover with this testing. The first of all is the case when the request format does not comply with the ELG specifications. So in this case, if we make a request like here with a type that is not among the ELG API defined types, like non-existing type, for example, it will say that there is an invalid request. And what happens here? What happens is that the user makes the request, but the service doesn't understand it. So it doesn't forward to the tool. It just responds with this error that is shown here, invalid request message. Then the second case, when we do a correct request and the tool responds, but this response does not comply with the ELG specifications. So what happens in this case is that this intermediate service put here, as you can see in the logs, could not resolve type non-existing type because these are response, annotations, audio, etc. The types it understands. So it responds an internal server error, and in the logs you can check what was the problem. And finally, the case of when there is an exception in your tool that is not correctly handled. When there is any exception that it may happen during the execution of the tool, what it should answer is with a failure message, but the failure message that we saw before, that is the one specified in the API. But it's an exception is not captured, for example, it may respond with an internal error, and the intermediate server will crash, will not understand this answer the tool is giving, and you can see here a stack trace of the error it has. In this case, of this example is a value error. So we can see here that something went wrong and that the tool should respond with a failure message and not with the exception of the process. Okay, now we go to the second part of the presentation, that is how to use the tools that there are available in the ELG platform. So first of all, say that there is an SDK for Python that allows the users to use the tools in a really easy way, as you will see now, from Python. But you can also do a request to the endpoints with HTTP protocol, for example. Okay, so when you want to use a tool, first of all, you have to know that this tool is available in the ELG. So the first you may want to do is know how to look in the catalog. So as Ian explained before, there is a catalog in the website of the ELG, that is this one, where you can apply some filters to find the tools or the resources that best fit your requirements. So imagine I want to, I need to use a machine translation tool for Spanish. I will check. So I can write here Spanish. So here I have all the tools for machine translation in Spanish. So I can select the one that best fits my requirements. And use it. See here is an example of the same I have shown. So I will skip it. And we have to say that there is another option to browse the catalog from the SDK that is as easy as this. We import the class catalog and we call the method search with the filters we may want to apply. So we will receive a list of results that will be, if you print them, will be shown like this in a very visual way, where you can find some information about them, the license, languages, a description, and important, the ID of the tool. First of all, once we know which tool we are going to use, we have to authenticate in the ELG. For this, we have some options. First one is direct authentication. So when we want to use a service, we have to instantiate this service, in this case, the service with the ID 474, and it will ask us to introduce a code for authentication that we can find it in the link that it shows. We have to log in here, and if we log in, it will show us a code that we have just to paste it here, and we can use in advance, we can use the tool because we are authenticated. The problem with this is that it will give you an expiring token that is valid only for a couple of hours. So for avoiding this, you can use the parameter offline access that will give you a non-expiring token that you can store it in a file with this instruction. And then the next time you want to instantiate the service, you indicate the file with the tokens and you are authenticated automatically. So once you are authenticated, you can use the tools. And in this case, this is an example of calling a service for name identity recognition in multiple languages. And as you can see, it's as easy as this. Just introduce the text and get the response. In this case, it's an annotations response where it says that, for example, Nicolas Tesla is a name that is a male, and that the name is Nicolas and the surname is Tesla, for example. Another kind of way to do the request, instead of using plain text, you can use a file. If you have a file, for example, with this name example.txt with a text inside, you can indicate the file to the service and you will receive the answer. In this case, it's a different request as the previous one, but you can see annotation types where Jean Dupont is a name, for example. And then finally, the third kind of request is using the text request object. That is also pretty simple. You just have to build this object request and indicate in the text and send the request object and getting the result. now we are going to talk about an advanced use that ELD provides, that is pipelining tools. What does it mean? Maybe we want to use as a chain some tools. For example, if we want to work with language that has a few speakers and maybe there are not many resources in the ELD for working with it. So we want to translate it first to English, use a tool of sentiment analysis in English, and then translate back to our language. So we can pipeline like this. In this case, is for German, not for English, the example, but anyway, we can use this pipelining where we can indicate that the output of the first tool we call is converted to any other format to use it as the input of the next tool. So here in this example, you can see that it's used a translation service and then a sentiment analysis service. And the input of the second one is the output of the first one. And if we want to get a corpus instead of use a tool, we can use the catalog in the same way, but indicating that we want to look for corpuses, and we will get the results. And when we know the ID of the corpus we want to download, using the download instruction and indicated the folder and the file name to download, you can get it. So you can see that the use of the ELD tools and the downloading of corpus is really simple. So maybe the first part of this presentation was a bit more in technical details for developers, but this part explains how to, in a very simple way, benefit from this platform. Finally, I'm going to talk about how to deploy locally the tools, because this is similar to the way we deployed a local tool to test. So maybe instead of use the tools in the ELD platform, we prefer to download the container of the tool and use it locally and deploy it locally. So it's as simple as this. We can use this instruction to get a Docker Compose that will have the information to deploy both the tool we want and the service execution server. So it will make easier to the users to deploy the tools in a local environment. And this is the same I showed before to deploy the tools locally. So just to finish, as a summary, we have talked about first how to contribute to the ELD, how to prepare the tools, and how to do all the steps in the process to from selecting a tool to getting it uploaded and available in the ELD platform. And finally, in the second part, we showed how to use the tools that are available in the ELD. So thank you, and I give the word to Joaquin, but I think we say that there is a break, I hope.
Yes, thank you, Pedro. Yes, it's now time now for a little 10-minute break. So all of this data we have just learned can sit in our minds, and then we will we will go back to the question and answer time slot. So let's say we will be back in 10 minutes, so 12:45. Okay, we'll be back. Thank you, everybody. Welcome back. Now it's our turn to try to answer all the questions you may have or you may rise here in this workshop during the event. I see there are not many questions today in the question box. That means that we did it great or that we did it badly. But I think it's important, or it would be interesting to rescue some questions that were asked in the. Oh, we have one question from Tina. Thank you, Tina, from the last workshop that were quite interesting. So I will give you the floor to Tina to ask her question, and then we will rescue those old questions. Please, Tina.
Okay, thank you. So my question is actually to Ian and the general ELG sort of customer numbers. So I just so there's now plenty of providers, right? But I kind of missed the number of plain users who have registered to the ELG. So can you please repeat what are the current numbers?
Excuse me. I'm not sure the right up-to-date numbers. I think when that graph was put together, there was, what was it? We had about 450 at the time, and
Okay,
we've just
yes,
started doing a push just recently to try and get more interest. And obviously with this, the numbers that I quoted previously were just before we actually went live with the quotes final release.
Okay.
So since then we're ramping up the kind of the outreach to try and get more people interested, and there are several other events coming up. So obviously, like this workshop that you're running here today for the
yes,
microservices
excellent.
project. ELG, we ourselves run a lot of similar workshops. We have a network of what we call national competence centres, which are sort of representatives in all the different countries of the EU. The idea is that each NCC will either has or will in the near future run these kind of training events directed specifically at the DLT community within their country,
yes.
and conducted probably in their language. So that's a way to reach out to more potential users.
Yes. Excellent. Thank you. Okay, on to you, Joaquin.
Okay. So in the last session we had an interesting question from Maria, that she asked if it was mandatory to implement the ELG API to get an NLP tool indexed or listed in the ELG platform. I think. Yeah.
Would you like me to take that on? And yes, essentially, yeah. The answer to that is that certainly we welcome registrations in the ELG catalogue for any kind of LT related resources and tools. So obviously, the focus of this workshop has been on the fully integrated ones, which can run with the ELG APIs, with the microservices that will run within the ELG cluster. But we also welcome anybody who wants to, if you've got, say, a graphical user interface or a web-based system of your own, which is a kind of a system as a whole rather than a microservice, then yeah, by all means, you can list those in the ELG catalog, where there's essentially you would register them as a tool or service, but you would not tick the box that says ELG compatible. Instead, you would list the sort of distribution. The distribution tab would be you would list the either a link to the running service if it's a public website, or a link to your GitHub repo or download page if it's something that you would be expecting people to download and run on the local machine. That's certainly a possibility. You can list it as a catalog record even if it doesn't actually have a fully integrated API.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. The other question was from Lorena. She had a tool with several functionalities, name recognition, name entity recognition. I think it was sentiment analysis or something like that. She asked if she should Dockerize each functionality independently, or she can do a whole Docker image.
And again, the answer to that is, as with so many of these kind of questions, the answer is it depends. I mean, there are several sorts of scenarios which are all covered by different examples that we've already got in the ELG platform catalog. So there are some cases where if you've got a system, an NLP tool that you want to integrate, which is itself a pipeline of several things, and so maybe one tool where I give it some text and it will produce tokens, sentences, part of speech tags, named entity tags, all as part of the same process. Then I would probably register that as wrap that as a single Docker image and register that in the catalog as one service which has several functions, and have it just produce all of those outputs every time. If what you have is a single library, say, which is able to do lots of these functions separately, so it can do named entity recognition, it can do sentiment analysis, it can the different options. Then what I would suggest with that is that you do one Docker image, which includes your tool, but then have it expose several different microservice endpoints for the different functions. So you would have one Docker image that has, rather than just being /process, it would be /process/ner for the named entity recognition, /process/sentiment for the sentiment analysis. If these are all kind of functions that are offered by the same library. And then what you can do is you could then register several separate metadata records in the catalog that all point to the same Docker image, but with the different execution locations, as we call them, the different endpoints within that image. So you would have, one record that says my clever NER system, one record that says my clever sentiment analysis system, but they would both actually be the same container with two different microservice endpoints. And then the third option is to make them completely separate. So if you've got a machine translation service, where you've got a machine translation tool that can do any combination of the languages, if you give it the right model, then what I would suggest for that would be that you make a separate Docker image for each language model, so that rather than putting lots of models into one image, I would have one image which is the engine plus the Spanish to English model, another image which is the engine plus the Spanish to French model or whatever, so that essentially the goal that you're always aiming for when you're doing Dockerized microservices like this is, well, on the one hand, obviously, is to make sure that it's self-contained and that it has all the information in there that it needs to be able to do its job, but no more than that. In other words, you want the images to be as large as they need to be, but as small as possible. Because the key thing, particularly for a platform like ELG, where when you want to run, when we run these, because we don't have the compute capacity to keep all of the services running all of the time, there's potentially a short delay the first time somebody requests a service after it's been idle for a while. We have to kind of spin it up from zero to launch the first copy of the service. So the smaller the image, generally speaking, the smaller the image, the faster it is to scale up from zero. And so you want your images to be as small as possible and as quick to start up as possible in order to keep the platform responsive. So that's the kind of thing you need to consider if you've got, if each image is 100 megabytes, you want to put one image in each, so one model in each image, rather than putting 10 models into one image and then finding that every time you want to run any of them, you have to download the whole gigabyte of data. It's those kind of technical considerations that you need to kind of think about to decide how best to do it for a particular use case.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Well, we have no more questions. We have to check the chat. No, there's not the chat. Not in the question and answers box. So we can end here our workshop. I will thank you, Sebastian, Ian, Tina, Pedro, for being here in these two sessions of the workshops. It's been a pleasure sharing these hours with you, and I hope to see you in the next workshop block we have to do in early 2023. So just a reminder for the audience, this workshop has been recorded. So the recording will be uploaded to the microservices website soon as we can. And thank you all for being here. And we hope to see you all in the next events of the microservice project. Thank you.
A final word from me on behalf of the European Language Grid. Please, if you haven't already, please do sign up. And if you can create records that represents your organization, you can help to kind of enrich the information we have there and grow the language technology community. There's a large number of organization records which we've kind of imported as skeleton records from different locations. So there may already be a kind of a partial record in there for your organization. Please feel free to press the claim button, which will then let you take ownership of that record and fill in the details yourself. Thank you.
Thank you all. See ya. It's been a pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Bye.